Welcome back to This Day in History. Today I'm going to be talking about the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which is just about 300 miles away from my home here. It was May 18th, 1980, 43 years ago. I had just turned 20 years old. I had been out of high school for about 11 months, and I was still living at home at my parents' house, in the house below the cemetery that we've taken a look at in the past. And at that time, I was still working at the first place that I went to work at, directly out of high school, and a factory. I was on an assembly line, but by probably February of, actually January of 1980, I had taken over a security job there, and I worked two swing graveyards, which were 13-hour shifts, and then I worked two the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and all I was security. And I believe those Saturday and Sunday shifts were 6 in the morning till either 5 or 6 o'clock at night. I think it's 5 or 6 at night. I don't remember. But it was a weekend. May 18th, 1980 was a Sunday morning. And it was sometime in February, I do believe, maybe March, that Mount St. Helens volcano in Washington State, just over the border, the Oregon-Washington border, had started to show volcanic activity. And there's a lot of volcanoes on this side of the United States. I believe we are in the Ring of Fire, as it's known. Anyway, Mount St. Helens started to show activity, and it was really exciting. I can remember Mom and I at home in the evenings watching the news on TV about it, because it was really exciting. And at that time, my dad was working a graveyard job, so he wasn't really home that much at night. But Mom and I were kind of glued to the TV because there was a lot of activity going on up there. And there was people living in the area, and the mountain was actually starting to swell up on one side, and there were earthquakes, and it was giving off some steam and ash, and it was really exciting. We were very much enjoying watching all the live news coverage of this. And one person in particular that the news media covered a lot was the owner and operator of Spirit Lake Lodge. Spirit Lake is just right on the very bottom part of the volcano, and that would be completely destroyed during the May 18th eruption. And they were warning this guy. His name was Harry Truman, and he was 80 or 81 years old, and he wasn't related to the president, Harry Truman. But he's a very charismatic guy. They would go up there and they would film him, and he's like, "Oh, that mountain's not going to hurt me. I've been here for years," and so forth and so on. And it was really pretty exciting. Well, Harry Truman was one of probably the first person killed during that May 18th eruption, because he was so close. The lodge was just so close. He literally had no time at all from the time the eruption happened. It was an earthquake, and it started a big landslide, and that landslide came down, and then there was the explosive gases coming out of the volcano, and they were going around 400 miles per hour, and they were superheated gases, so he stood absolutely no chance. And I've always wondered what that must have been like. It was about 8:30, 8:35 in the morning. I've just always wondered what was that like to be there. It must have been, a quiet morning. Where was he at? Was he, did he hear the initial explosion? And it just probably took seconds before that mudslide just started coming down. Did he see it coming? Was he asleep? What happened? And ultimately, that entire area was just completely destroyed by the mud flow and the pyroclastic superheated gas flow and the 400-mile-an-hour winds. And Spirit Lake today, they say it's about 150 feet higher up now because all that mud and debris just filled up that little basin area where Spirit Lake was at. And now there's a new Spirit Lake, but the original one was like 150 feet or so down. And Harry Truman is still up there somewhere, but we will never know. And another person that was killed, that was probably killed at practically the same time, he was about 5 miles away, and that was David Johnson. He was a volcanologist, and he was up there. I believe he arrived to Coldwater 2, which is now Johnson Ridge Observatory. That's where the Mount St. Helens camera is at and focused on the mountains. So he was about 5 miles, I believe, from the eruption. And he has a haunting last photo of him. This photo here is taken on Coldwater 2. And he's sitting outside his trailer because he would spend the night up there and have like seismic stuff set up and whatever. So you see his trailer there. He's sitting out there. I believe it's early that morning before the eruption, or it may have been the next day. I think it was early morning, just before the eruption. So you see his trailer, then you see an International Scout 4-wheel drive that towed the trailer up there, and he's sitting there, and that's the last photo taken of him. And he actually reported it when the initial explosion happened. He had a radio, CB or whatever it was, and the explosion happened. He got on the radio and he says, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. And that's all he got to say. And it was probably, I don't know how many, it might have taken 30 seconds or maybe a little longer for that flow to get to him, that 400 miles an hour pyroclastic flow. And it would be so hot that it killed everything inside. Everything was gone. Coldwater 2 was also just decimated by it. It just swooped through there. All the trees were knocked down, and this went on for miles and miles. But he was so close to it that it just obliterated everything. And I believe when they were building the highway up to what is now the Johnson Ridge Observatory, they actually found some bits and pieces of his trailer. I don't know if they ever found the International 4-wheel drive Scout or anything else, but I'm sure David was just burned to a cinder, and hopefully it went quick for him and Truman as well. And there were others too. I think there's around 50 people killed, and the only other one I'm aware of is a guy named Blackburn. He was another one, and he was doing something. I'm not sure if he was a reporter or if he worked for the volcano situation, but he was eventually found in his car, and I found these pictures of them finding his car, and you can see how it's just buried in ash. So much ash came down. It was just an incredible event. I'll never forget this. This is one of those events in which you always remember exactly where you were, and there's a number of those in my life. So it was that Sunday morning. I was down there by myself. The place is closed, so everything's nice and quiet. There's nobody there, and I was out on the loading dock because we actually loaded up freight cars and things with our products that we made, as well as trucks and things. And I was just standing out there on the loading docks, just leaning against one of the big pillars that hold the roof up. The loading dock is really long, and there's railroad tracks right there. And I was just standing there, and it was around 8:30 in the morning, but I wasn't really sure at the time. And I'm just standing there, and it's quiet out there. There's a few cars going around, but there's no trains or nothing. And suddenly I hear a big sonic boom. And I thought to myself, we don't really hear sonic booms around here anymore. And we used to hear them a lot. I can remember just sonic booms back in the 70s. You would hear them all the time as sound barriers broken. And I thought, we don't really hear those anymore. And that was about it. And I didn't really think about it much anymore. And then later on that day, like I said, I didn't have a radio or TV or anything like that with me. So I didn't really know what had happened, but that sonic boom was the sound of the volcano having that initial eruption. So when the next watchman got down there at 5 or 6, he just immediately started saying, "Oh man, isn't that amazing what happened? That's just so crazy." And I'm like, "What, huh? I don't know what you're talking about." And he told me, he said Mount St. Helens had erupted and it had decimated that whole area at that time. That whole area was just covered in ash and everything, and they didn't really know how bad it was. And he said there was flooding, the rivers were flooding, and debris and all that stuff. I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. And I said, when did this happen? He said, I think it was 8:30 in the morning or something. And I didn't really put it together. And as I was going home, I got my ride to go home, to go back up to my parents' house. I thought, I heard that sonic boom that morning, and it was about 8:30 in the morning. And I didn't have a watch then, like I don't have one now. But and I thought, that's crazy. That couldn't have been it, could it? And because that's like 300 miles away. So anyway, I got home. And as soon as I got home, Mom was in there, and she's just glued to the TV. And as I walk in there with my lunchbox and everything, she's like, "Oh, look at this! Look at this!" And they were showing replays of the billowing coming out of the mountain, and it went like 6 miles high into the atmosphere. And the ash at that time was going east towards Spokane and Idaho and all that. And so we sat there just glued to the TV, eating dinner and everything later that night, watching it, and it was really amazing. And we wouldn't find out about, the only one we knew about at that time was Harry Truman, because we'd seen so many videos of Harry Truman. "Oh, that mountain ain't gonna hurt me," that type of thing. And we were both like, "Oh, I hope he got out," or "I hope he got out." And at that time, they couldn't even see that area. There was just so much ash in the air, and but ultimately they would find that that whole area was just like a moonscape. So anyway, that is what happened 43 years ago today. I actually heard from here, from where the town I'm living in. I actually heard the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and it would actually later come out in the days after that people here reported hearing a rare sonic boom at about 8:30, 8:35, 8:34 in the morning. And that's just about the time I heard that big sonic boom. And so it was heard here.